What is up, everybody? A little bit of a Tuesday Buffalo Bills news drop. And you know that the Shout Bills podcast has to come to you with a little bit of an emergency pod. I think it's an emergency kind of acquisition. He's Ryan Talbot. I'm Matt Parrino. It's one that we've been talking about going back to March now, Ryan. The Bills agreed to a one-year deal with Poona Ford today, defensive tackle, formerly of the Seattle Seahawks. Yesterday, agreeing to a one-year deal with running back Latavius Murray. We're going to talk about both of these moves for the next 20 or so minutes. Thank you so much for joining us. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the show as well. And get out your calendar while you're at it. May 20th, Shout Live returns to Wingnuts. Ryan will be there. I will be there. We'll have a live podcast. We'll eat wings. We'll drink beers. We'll talk Bills. It's a great time. I'll actually put a link in the description to the RSVP information page. It's over on Facebook. Click that RSVP that you're coming. Just so for no other reason other than you'll get a reminder when the date is getting close. It's kind of like a little calendar reminder. How are you, Ryan?
Hey, I am doing great. Big news here on a Tuesday. Great signing by the Bills.
So when Brandon Beane was done with the draft, this came up. We talked about it over the weekend, that he was kind of annoyed about not getting a defensive tackle. But I think in a lot of ways, for me, this is not only the next best thing, but maybe the better alternative to getting a rookie that you got to kind of develop. It's a little bit more of an unsure thing. I think Poona Ford comes in and really allows you to do a couple of things, starting with the fact that he's going to play one technique, which I went back and looked at some of the beat reporters from the Seahawks and what they kind of were saying about him last season and into the offseason. And Pete Carroll even came out and said, we probably played him too much out of position last year. They asked him to play three technique. The Bills are going to swing him back to one technique, which I think potentially could yield huge returns for Ed Oliver. I think that's the biggest area that Bills fans should be excited about. Adding Ford to be kind of like a duo with Daquan Jones at that one technique spot could really unleash Ed Oliver.
Yeah, so first and foremost, listen, Bills fans, you know what it's like to have a player that's played out of position. Quentin Jefferson a few years ago when the Bills signed and played out of position, couldn't live up to what they were trying to get out of him. So bring in Poona Ford, allowing him to play that one technique is going to really help the Bills quite a bit. He's excellent against the run. He's gotten better as a pass rusher every year, and he's pretty good as a pass rusher at this point in his career. In terms of the signing itself, Matt, you said it's the next best thing, or maybe it is the best thing. The only downside to signing Poona Ford over drafting a rookie is you only have him on contract for this 1 year. Mm-hmm. But the caveat to that is I'm going to put him in the Taylor Rapp umbrella, where I think this is like a 1-year tryout, Matt. And if he plays the way that he's played in his career when he's been in position, where he's in a comfort spot, where he's not being moved around, I think that the Bills are going to want to sign him long-term, whether that's in season or at the end of the year. So, you only have him like every other D tackle on this roster right now for the 2023-2024 season. But I think that it can lead to an extension here in due time.
Yeah, and I think another piece of this that I really like doing some research on Ford is he checks all the boxes from a football perspective. But I think it's maybe the off-the-field stuff that if I'm Brandon Beane and especially Sean McDermott, I'm the most excited about, because I think you bring a guy in that is super unselfish. I mean, he did whatever the Seahawks wanted him to do, so much so that we're sitting here April 29th, May 1st, and Pete Carroll's still talking about wishing there was a world they could live in where they could bring him back again. And you reported it. He wanted to go to a place where he thought he had a chance to win a Super Bowl, so much so that he took less money apparently to come to Buffalo to kind of line things up with Ed Oliver, Von Miller and company. And, it's just the kind of grinder mentality that a player like this has. Undrafted guy, had to work for everything that he's had over the last couple of years. I read one tweet from a reporter that said he's the kind of guy that is the first out on the practice field, and in a game will go rush the passer and then run down a receiver from behind 20 yards down the field at 300 some odd pounds as a one tech defensive tackle. That's special stuff. And now you're adding that as maybe your third or fourth best defensive tackle.
Yeah, fans are going to love Poona Ford. And, the Bills were interested in him in mid-March. I put something out on Twitter on mid-March, and it was mutual interest. Poona Ford wanted to join the Bills. But at that point in time, Matt, Brandon Beane's admitted it. He had to offer out certain contracts at certain amounts of money because he didn't want to mess with the compensatory pick formula. He wanted to make sure that they got that what's supposed to be a third round pick for Tremaine Edmonds in next year's draft. As of yesterday, May 1st at 4 p.m., the Bills and every other team in the league can now sign free agents, and it no longer messes with the comp pick formula. So the Bills were able to up their offer a little bit. They were not offering as much as a few other teams were. But like you said, he wants to win a Super Bowl. He loves what the Bills have been doing here, and he thinks he's going to be a good fit and maybe be one of those guys that can get them over the hump and get them into the Super Bowl. So it's a win-win for both sides. And again, it shows what they've built here in Buffalo means something to players because he left money on the table.
Just putting the link in the description right now live on YouTube, and it will also, and that's for Wingnuts, and then it will also be in the description on all the audio platforms, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you go, wherever you listen to Shout, you'll be able to kind of check that out and get more details. May 20th. I want to make sure everybody knows, because I end up getting a lot of DMs, Ryan, after the fact, like, oh, I wish I would have known it was this day or that day. And now we're trying to kind of plan these out a little bit further so people can kind of get them on their calendar and schedule around.
Yeah, important to make sure that the Bills fans are aware of this, because we've been getting great turnouts, but you're right. There's always a few that said, oh, I wish I had known that, or, oh, I'm in the area, but I didn't see it until now, or this, that, or the other. So check it out. Click on the link. If you're interested, click interested. If you can get there, hit going, make sure that you get that reminder and you join us at Wingnuts May 20th. Great wings, great beer. Join us before and after the podcast.
What does this do for the defensive tackle or defensive line outlook as we kind of eye training camp and how this thing ultimately shakes out? Because now you're really talking about 5 potential defensive tackles that are for sure rosterable, but I think it's going to be tough to cut any one of them. And so then you start looking at the defensive ends and, what's still available. We talked about on the last episode on the market at defensive end. I mean, Yannick Ngakoue has already been mentioned several times in the chat here, but Frank Clark is still out there. Melvin Ingram. We could go through the long lists. Matt Ioannidis is kind of like a little bit of a hybrid. He could play either, but there's a lot of fun names on the free agent market. The Bills could still look to go out and get on an affordable deal and then really put an uptick on the competition, which I think they need to do. And I think they're in a good spot because, like, you look at a guy like Shaq Lawson, I think there's a path to the practice squad for him. I think what we've learned here is that he came back to Buffalo, found a fun role for himself, a good role, had some success toward the end of the season, but there still wasn't a lot of people, batting down his door. So I think you could get through camp, kind of fit him on the practice squad and, like, all right, if we need you, we got you. I think this could also put a lot of pressure on AJ Epinesa if they go out and they sign another defensive end. Boogie Basham, not so much. He's going to his third year. I think there's, higher hopes maybe for his ceiling, maybe being a little bit higher than Epinesa, but we'll see. But it definitely changes the conversation and the math when you're trying to figure out, and we're going to do it on tomorrow's show, that 53-man roster projection.
Right. The only way it doesn't change the math is if you have Von Miller starting the season on the PUP list, which I think is a very realistic situation. So maybe right now you're okay. You can get by with exactly the guys you're expecting to make that 53-man roster. But I'm glad you mentioned that the Bills could go out and sign a DN, because that's where it gets tricky, like you said. And maybe that's where it is a Shaq Lawson that you have to put down on the practice squad, because there weren't a lot of other teams knocking down his door to sign him this offseason. Maybe it is that you trade AJ Epinesa for another pick. The Bills are already stockpiling picks in next year's draft. You're not going to get a high pick for Epinesa, but you're probably going to get a day 3 pick that you'd be okay with. And the only reason I'm mentioning Epinesa by name is because I think there's more value in AJ right now. He's coming off of a quiet 6.5 sack season. There's probably a few teams that a few years ago had interest in him that said, okay, he's still progressing in the right direction. Maybe we can bring AJ in and he can kind of take to that next level. So I agree with you that this could open the door for a potential trade if the Bills go out and sign one of these edge rushers, these really good edge rushers that are still in the market.
I think for one last thing on Ford before we move to Murray, I think this is a really important signing because we saw what the addition of Daquan Jones meant to Tremaine Edmonds last year. And I think that going into this world of the unknown with whatever it's going to look like with his replacement, whether it ends up being Tyrell Dodson, Balen Spector, Terrell Bernard, or maybe in some way, shape, or form, Dorian Williams, they're going to need really good production up front to probably mask some of the learning curve that there's going to be filling in for a guy that started, 70 some odd games for the Bills over the last 5 seasons. Ford, I think, comes in there, from a run defense perspective. I think you get really excited about his ability to take on double teams and fit into that role perfectly to allow those speedy linebackers kind of move around and make plays.
Yeah, I think you kind of just nailed it right there. Your linebackers are only going to be as good as the defensive line play in front of you, at least the replacement for Edmonds, that is. As long as Poona Ford can come in here and contribute the way I think he can, it will help make life easier for whoever that Tremaine Edmonds replacement ends up being.
Also interesting to note that Pete Carroll calls him Pooh.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be fun to have a Pooh in the locker room. I as a father of 2 young children, I'll be thinking of Winnie the Pooh, but I'll make sure to ask for clarification on what version of Pooh he likens his nickname to.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's Pooh with the H. I would hope so, but I guess wait and see. I don't know how nice of a nickname that is if you're being called the POO option of Pooh.
Oh, I wasn't even referring to that. Maybe there's a little bit of a backstory there somewhere else. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
when Sal put out his tweet, he spelled it with just the POO. I'm like, is that really the
that's
version?
how I saw it written in some stories about him.
All right. So
we'll figure that out. Yeah, we'll figure that out. It'll be fun. All right. Speaking of making things interesting in training camp, what do we make of the Latavius Murray signing? Because I think this is a skill set that they are doubling down on, that bigger physical style. And I know Damian Harris is kind of like the smaller, compact version of that, but I just more mean the style of runner, like physical in between the tackles, willing to take on defenders at all 3 levels. Latavius Murray has done that for many years. I think he has, I was reading it on the PR sheet that they put out yesterday. 8 straight seasons of 4 touchdowns or more was the longest active streak in the NFL. And the Bills got to love that about adding that to the mix. But what's his path to the roster? Because I think it's complicated. And I think part of it is okay because the way that he talked about joining the Bills yesterday, he is all in on Buffalo. This seemed like a Buffalo or bust type situation. And in that case, I think it could be a lot like Duke Johnson last year, where you just stash him on the practice squad and other teams kind of know, yeah, we can go poach him, but he wants to be there. And I don't know if we want to take him out of that situation and add a disgruntled running back to our room.
Yeah, from what I understand, he was really excited to join the Bills. He's from the Syracuse area. It kind of meant a lot to him to kind of join a team that I wouldn't say was his hometown team, but near his hometown, close nearby. And you mentioned one scenario. He takes on the Duke Johnson role. He's their practice squad guy, but I think there might be a path to the 53-man roster for him as well. And in terms of usage, use him on the 2nd and short, the 3rd and short situations. He's very good at converting those. If it's 4th and inches, yes, by all means, Josh Allen, QB sneak, it works well. But this can limit the toll and the amount of hits that Josh Allen has to take throughout the year if he can make it onto the 53-man roster. And in terms of his path, Tywan Jones has not been re-signed yet. So in my mind, I look at Nyheim Hines being that running back / special team ace. I know it's not the same role that Tywan Jones had on special teams, but you're going to have him as your key return man. So then you're still having the same amount of running backs as last year being on your 53-man roster, and just slightly different roles.
Interesting. I like the veteran presence that he brings. And I think, Hines brings it and Harris brings it to a degree. He's a little bit younger, but I'm Murray. I mean, he's 33 years old. I mean, he's been in the league. This is his 6th stop. He's played with some elite players, and listening to him talk about, watching James Cook in high school when he was teammates with Dalvin in Minnesota and what that was like from a distance, and now to be in the same room with him, the way that, his NFL career is coming kind of full circle. That's a super, not only a fun story, but a team building type of thing that I think there's so much to be gained from adding players like that. And I think for as much as we've talked about Brandon Beane's draft history and, maybe some of the lack of big hit impact players the last couple of years, I think at this stage to be adding this quality of talent and players to your roster after a draft that I think most people would agree was at least above average, if not really good or great, depending on who you talk to. They're in a really good spot. And I think sometimes we also forget about what this team actually did last year. Like, this is a 13-win team that had a lot of adversity, injuries and otherwise, the whole DeMar Hamlin situation, Kim Pagula, we've covered all of that, and then ended up going to the playoffs, winning a playoff game, obviously having it end poorly. But to build off of what they did last year by bringing back basically all of the same pieces that you want to bring back and then adding a couple more in very important spots, man, I think that you, if you're a Bills fan sitting here today, you're really excited about the construction of this roster and what this potentially looks like. I want to get to respond to that, and then I want to get to one more thing.
Yeah, no, I think that Bills fans should be very happy with where the roster is right now, knowing that they could still do one or two more potential moves to bolster their pass rush. They could still there's still a few other things that I think they could be in the market for. An offensive tackle. I know some people on Twitter didn't agree with that, but they could bring in some more competition there. So I don't think they're done yet. But the way they've built up this roster after having a successful season, a 13-win season last year. There's no reason to think that they're going to fall off of a cliff here. I think they're going to have a very successful year. Last thing on Murray, I see someone in the comments spin saying, "Isn't Damian Harris supposed to be the short yardage back?" I don't look at him as a short yardage back. I look at him as a change of pace to James Cook. He is a more physical, obviously, back than Cook is. But you also have to worry a little bit about Harris in terms of his health. He has a history of injuries, so not a short yardage back in my opinion. I'm looking at Murray specifically being put onto the field in those 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2 situations where when he gets the ball, he can be very successful moving the chains.
So 2 more things before we get out of here. And this is going to be a short 20-minute pod. We're coming back to you guys tomorrow. But I saw something going around on yesterday. Actually, this one we'll save for tomorrow, actually. But I want to talk about the DeAndre Hopkins, the end to that chase. Apparently, DeAndre Hopkins showed up for workouts or somewhere and basically said, "Who said anything about wanting to change teams?" I guess there's something to be said for not saying something, DeAndre, but that's neither here nor there. So that chase maybe gets put on ice for a while. Ryan, I don't know how much at this stage with what they've done in free agency and where they're sitting at cap wise, I don't know how much the DeAndre Hopkins move even made sense at this point, knowing what they'd have to kind of do to figure it out after the fact.
Yeah, it's out the door at this point. I thought maybe if he was released, they could build a contract where the cap hit wasn't much in year one and work around it that way. But I think that scenario is out the door. I don't know if you were a Seinfeld watcher. Wasn't there an episode where George Costanza got fired and then he showed up like the next day acting like it never happened? That's kind of like Hopkins, like showing up to work in Arizona. Like, what are you talking about, a trade? I didn't ask for a trade, even though he had a whole interview segments about it and things like that. So I'm guessing Hopkins found out that there wasn't a team that wanted to take on the entire contract. Arizona wasn't willing to eat any part of the contract. So, what do? I just kind of show up and I go about my business, and that's all he really can do at this point.
Brandon Beane was on the Rich Eisen show yesterday and was asked about the Stefon Diggs situation and how the season ended and if he'd had any contact with him, kind of similar to what I asked him, I think a month ago, and he didn't want to really get into the details of how much they talk and so on and so forth. But basically, is there any concern about the player? And Bean gave all of the usual responses, like Steph is Steph. He's competitive. I want that guy on my team more than I want somebody that was okay with losing. But here's a quote that I pulled out from it that I thought was something that I think Bills fans will be excited about, because this is still a narrative, a talking point on message boards and on social media sites about whether or not Stefon Diggs wants out or maybe a new situation. Brandon said, "I think we're in really good shape there, and I know he'll at the right time get here and join and be ready to roll for the season." So I think all the conspiracy theorists out there and all the worry warts, if you will, and rightfully so. I mean, dealing with that important of a piece of your team and there being any unrest there, it makes a lot of sense. But it seems like Diggs will eventually show up and it'll be harmony once again as they look towards reloading in 2023.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. There was a lot of national media sites that ran with the story that he wasn't here a few weeks ago. he hasn't been here the last few years at that point in the season. It's optional. So that was much ado about nothing. So when it comes time to be here where it's mandatory, he'll show up. It'll be fine. Training camp, he'll meet with the media there too, and he'll be the same Stefon Diggs that we've spoken to and talked to over the last few years. He's a competitive guy, and there's nothing wrong with that.
There is nothing wrong to RSVPing to Shout Live at Wingnuts on May 20th. Beers, bills, wings, everything that you can want on a Saturday night. Ryan Talbot will even be there in the house with myself, and we'll look forward to meeting all of you. If you've already come out before, come back out. If this will be your first time, it's going to be, I imagine the weather is going to really start to turn. Maybe we'll be out on the patio there. It's a great time. We usually tell people to get there around 6. The show will start at about 7:30, and then we hang out before and after. I put the link in the description to go RSVP on the info page. We're excited about that show, Ryan.
Oh, always excited when we go to Wingnuts for our monthly appearances there, and can't wait to talk to some Bills fans before and after the show.
Hit that like button. Over 300 in the middle of it. Well, it's not the middle of the day anymore. Almost dinner time. But thank you so much. Like and subscribe before you go. Hit that link in the description, and we will see you tomorrow night, Wednesday, 53-man roster projection. We'll have some fun. Take